Let's start drilling a little deeper into some of these options. Let's just have that set. So, here we've just got a heat pulse effect, and we can spot everyone who lived through the 60s and 70s by the slight wince at the mushroom cloud. Actually, let's give ourselves a few more frames to play with, 350 frames, and let's make our container a little bigger. Now, notice that these container dimensions, when I play with them, all operate from the center. Pretty obvious, really. So if I enter a wide dimension of 10 meters and a 5 meter grid offset, that'll park it on the ground. Pretty much. Let me grab my emitter, and I can't see it because it's all covered in voxels, so I'm going to flip to wireframe mode. And as ever, I've forgotten to set myself back to frame 0, so I'm just going to create a keyframe license. I meant for that to happen. So, let's run that again. Oops, I didn't turn on textured shaded solid mode. So, I can see the adaptive container size filling up, but I can't see what's happening. Derp. Never mind.
Is it faster for you when you do it like that, because it doesn't have to update the report?
Yeah, just not enough to really want to be flying blind.
Yeah.
You know, it's a saving, but I don't think it's a big enough one to really care about. The one possible gotcha on that is if you're really running out of GPU RAM, you may be able to score an extra few frames by simming blind. Anywho, textured shaded solid, and now we can see the sweet cleansing fire. I mean, we can see the temperature emission. All very cool. But let's start playing with things in a little more detail. Let's try applying a texture to our emitter object. So if I set my texture, let's take a look at my grid size, 1 meter. So if I set my texture scale to about 5 meters and resim, try 2 meters. And then whack up my texture contrast. And just fiddle with these values and keep hitting the start button again.
What is the texture that you're scaling?
It's...
The concept?
Sorry?
Is it like a concept?
It's this sort of cellular noise.
Oh.
So that varies the temperature of the
Yeah, it's... I've had varying results trying to just apply a texture map to cause emission driven by a bitmap. That bit seems to still be in progress. But as you can see, I'm starting to get this cellular pattern arrayed across my emitter object. Starting to bring in a little more interest. One nice little thing is that the texture preview, as you can see, is actually connected to the timeline slider. So while I'm mucking around with my texture speeds, oops, I can actually see what it's doing in the view window.
See, there you just have the burn section, so it doesn't have all that line coming up off the top.
I'm sorry?
You just have the burn section of the,
Burn is not actually active at this point. This is just temperature rolling upwards and convecting.
well, if you have the temperature fade off really quick, you actually, mirror what you actually have the texture looking like a film.
I was gonna ask, what does burn mean to turbulence FD?
Okay, there's actually a fairly involved relationship that all roots around the fuel channel. And we will get to that, and we'll get to that fairly soon. I just want to cover some of the other functions of the simulation so that we've got a bit of an understanding of what's going on before we get there. Now, if I turn surface texture off, again, we'll just get that. Aha, actually it operates that way, doesn't it? Then we just get that uniform poof. And as Dave said, by ramping the emission level down to 0, we just get that straightforward single puff.
I meant, like, increase your cooling so it cools almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You just get like a little glowing
Yep.
fire.
The emitters panel. Let's remove our temperature mode envelope, leave it set to 5. And in temperature, let's set a half-life of 6 frames. Let's try bringing that down even further. No, 2. Half-life of 2 frames.
Kind of reminds me of Bunsen burner.
Yeah. Texture on
Pilot light.
that. Yeah.
Right. So, all rather nice, but it's all a bit quiet, isn't it? So let's take a look at some of our other options. Upresing, timing, velocity, wind, vorticity, and turbulence, which is sort of, as you'd expect, kind of central to Turbulence FD. All these options I am perfectly happy to explain in these first couple of tabs, but we can come back to that later. Let's take a look at what's going to have an obvious effect on our sim. Under wind, we've got pretty obvious directions and speed, so if I just add 2 meters per second wind, that's going to apply a really boring constant wind speed. Okay, so the values for this are animatable, but the wind can't be used topically. Like if you had a Bunsen burner, say, you may wish to blow the wind around topically, or what's a good example? Tailpipe. If you've got a tailpipe and you have smoke streaming out of that, then you'd probably want wind flow inside the simulation. So I'm going to set that wind back to 0, open my emitters panel, and look in forces. Let's try setting a normal force of 1. Chuff. So you see how the emission is now being blown outwards a little bit.
Is that along the normals? Is that why it's called normal force? Yes.
Yep. Does what it says on the tin, basically. I think, yeah, my emitter object is not that we talk about in public. Right, now with our emitter nicely in here, normal force 5 meters, start sim. Chuff. As you can see from the sideways element near the rim, that is in fact forcing outwards along the normal. And also it's bringing a bit more visual interest in, because it's not everything just pulling in the same direction. So, wind, boring. I'm going to turn that normal force back off and go back to our very straightforward hemisphere O flame, because I want these next things I'm going to be playing with to be quite obvious. Let's take a look at vorticity, which can be thought of as instant turbulence. It's swirlies. The problem with vorticity is that if you leave it going too long, you end up with absolute chaos. Also, everywhere a lot of places you look in TFD, you will find a drop down for intensity channel, and under that, intensity mapping. So let's just turn that up nice and high. Run sim. As you can see, that's bringing a little curliness into there from the get-go.
That was interesting.
Let's increase that some more. So the real power with a CFD system like turbulence or fume is that the voxels are passing data to one another. You've probably heard me say advection about half a dozen times so far. That is just a fancy word meaning the movement of mass through a fluid. So when you swoosh your hand around in a swimming pool and you feel the swooshing despite the fact your hand's underwater, that's advection. It's pressure and mass moving through a fluid. Probably not the exact physics definition, but it's 20 years since I was in a physics lab, so let's be forgiving. Okay, lovely. So as you can see, vorticity very rapidly starts bringing in these little curlicues that are so dear to our hearts. That's nice to get things started promptly if, for whatever reason you don't want pre-roll on your simulation. As you can see, that gets going quite quickly. The problem is, if you're using something that's going to hang around a long time, vorticity keeps adding to whichever channel you're applying it. So you can end up with very messy, chaotic sim volume quite quickly. Sort of the difference between well, if you take a container that's half oil and half water and shake it like that, and you just end up with this homogeneous mass of globules, that's kind of what vorticity over too long will end up looking like. That said, it is jolly useful for getting noise in from the get-go. So, back to our excessively well-behaved flame. Let's try getting some turbulence in there. Turbulence intensity. Pretty straightforward. That's how big a turbulence force we're adding. So let's throw in 2 meters of turbulence and resim. Starting to get a little bit more interesting.
So this is more of a distortion of the existing simulation instead of vorticity, whose effects are actually propagated with the sim, or does this affect the sim as well?
Turbulence very much affects the sim. Turbulence in this case is pretty much defined as random motion vectors added to the simulation.
So it's a pushing instead of a rotating. Is that how it is? Vorticity?
Yeah, the vorticity is effectively a procedural cheat, whereas turbulence is actually calculating the disturbance in the sim volume. Well, vorticity just has, an overall control level. Turbulence has much more detail in that I have a smallest size and a largest size. So if I punch in a value of 5 meters for my largest size and resim, you can see how it's actually affecting a graduated range of details.
Quite lovely.
I like it.
Is there anything that, is there anything that vorticity can do that turbulence cannot do?
No. If you've got the time to set it up, you're generally better off with turbulence. The one thing is, it doesn't have the sort of immediate effect as vorticity. So if you want instant chaotic detail, vorticity is kind of useful. Personally, I'd always rather have 50 frames of pre-roll in which my fluid sim can start establishing itself. Makes sense?
And then you introduce a disruption?
Yeah.
Have you ever used both at the same time? Or do you just go with one over the other?
I sometimes, okay, let's just try this. So here's turbulence happening on our sim.
Turbulence is just rolling around.
So I can add vorticity on top of this. And that adds more chaos, as you can see. And for most short-run sims, it's not really a big deal. In this case, we've got a fairly brief half-life, so stuff is dissipating before the added chaos can become, you know, any kind of a problem.
Can't stop looking at it.
This is why I always have roommates, so that after a day or two they look in on me and see I'm not just sat there going, must sim. Right. Now, vorticity and turbulence are two ways of adding extra detail. There's a further way, known as subgrid detail, that we will get to. And subgrid detail is actually insanely powerful and really, really, really cool. Because vorticity and turbulence both operate at the voxel level. They can only work on cells that have data in them. And cells that have data in them are what raises your computation time and your disk usage. Whereas the subgrid detailing system is a cheat, where literally details are added below the level of the grid. So it's an extra layer of procedural perturbation on top that lets you add, you know, bring in lots of extra little curlicues and curls that makes everything look really interesting.
Not a tremendous hit for the render time. Calculus.
I noticed both have intensity channel.
Yes.
We haven't gone over that yet.
We have not gone over intensity channels at all yet. This is probably as good a time as any. The intensity channel simply, okay, first of all, what's my thing emitting? It's emitting temperature, okay, cool. The intensity channel is which value set is this effect being applied to, is, in this case, turbulence being applied to. So I've set it to be applied to temperature. So if I run that sim again, we've got turbulent temperature. Now, what I can do further to this is go and deal with turbulence intensity mapping. Now, mapping one value to another value is a huge, huge thing in TFD. So if I click that button, I get a graph that's running, by and large, from about 0 to about 1 in the y-axis, and has these defaults of 0.1 to 0.3 in the x-axis. And what this means is the correlation between the temperature value of each voxel and the amount of turbulence applied. Good so far? Okay. So if I put my x value right down at 0, 0, and my y value way up at 1, 1, or thereabouts, cells with a temperature value lower, higher, higher, lower. the hot voxels are not as turbulent as the cooler voxels. Let me reverse that, just for fun. I'm expecting this to look a little weird now. So you see now how we're getting a lot of chaos in the fire. Maybe not that easy to see, but you can see the bits being thrown off.
The cooler it is, the more turbulent it's getting.
Other way around this time. That was the first time. But of course, seeing as the cooler voxels are coming off something that's turbid, it's coming off relatively chaotically as well. Jen's just actually misspoken. The blue stuff isn't smoke. Not at this point. All we're playing with here is temperature. So it's doing heaty things like expanding the gas around it, increasing the pressure of the gas around it, and it's rising as hot stuff is prone to do, because again, when a gas heats, it expands, its local density reduces, it goes up. That's what's happening there. This is why, as I said a while ago, that fuel is actually the really good fun channel. We'll get to that. Because what fuel does is converts to temperature, to density, and to burn. Whereas with the other channels, I've been directly controlling temperature and just setting a temperature for the voxels that are incident to my emitter object. Whereas if one starts playing with fuel, then suddenly the picture becomes much, much more detailed. I just wanted to sort of touch on the main bits and pieces, the gas pedal and the stick shift and the clutch, before we start getting into the really fun stuff. But now that you brought it up, let's take a look at one of the demo scenes that deal with fuel, because it's fun. Simple ignition, scenes, simple ignition. Yes, change content folder. Let's just go and point at the appropriate TFD cache folder. Oh, you found it. Excellent. Okay. So, what we have in this scene, our fluid container in white, obviously. Let's take a look at our emitters. We have a ball whose temperature is set to 1. The ball is on fire. And we have a cylinder that is emitting 4 units of fuel. If we look in the force, we can see that the ball is just sitting there burning, you know, like balls do. And the cylinder is emitting its 4 units of fuel with a y-axis force of minus 400 millimeters. Now, if you're thinking, but Mark, y is up. Yeah, I'm guessing that something got rotated, because this is, again, one of the Turbulence FD demo scenes. However, if I run that sim, ploomf! That's what happens when the emitted fuel reaches the fire. Yay.
It doesn't visualize the new fuel?
If I go to viewport preview and switch my preview channel to fuel, rewind, whoomp.
Wow.
Cool, huh? So if we look at temperature,
If you set it to none, does it show all of them?
no, it shows none of them.
Well,
That's
just wondering if there's a way to see the fuel and oil playing at the same time.
not yet, but this really is software in very active development. I mean, there have been times when I've had, you know, an issue, and I've gotten in touch with the author, and he's sent me a new version the following day.
That's awesome.
That really is awesome, and it's something that can't be overstated. It's one of the main reasons I say this is, you know, this is fine for studio use, is because the guy's agile and really cares about his customers.
Where are they based? What country?
On the internet somewhere. For all I know, he's actually an AI in a box. But
Somewhere in Europe, I just forget the country.
So, no disrespect, Jasha. Love you to bits.
I don't know where that is.
Just wondering if you had to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning to have a conversation with
Never actually had a real-time conversation. So, again, could be an AI. Thwomp, So, that's kind of cool, isn't it? That's just what the fuel is doing. And you can see that there is actually speed involved with that combustion. There is travel time and burn rate.
And it burns from the outside in.
I'm sorry?
And it burns from the outside in.
Yes. You can burn it from the inside out by adding a fuel source to the inside. But, you know, that's not what happened this time.
What's worth the software hails from Germany.
Excellent. German engineering can't be beat.
Yay, Google.
Hooray! Okay, so, on the premise that at some point you're going to want to set light to something and have it emit smoke, this is where the density channel can frequently come in very useful. If I turn the density channel on, call it active, then rerun the sim, and this time let me set my viewport renderer to density. Please work, please work, please work. You know, I'm willing to bet that I forgot to turn density emission on. This is the thing. Lots of buttons, lots of options. Duck into the simulation, fuel. No. Density emission 0.0. Oops. So let's set that to 5 so that we are actually emitting the channel that I'm actively previewing. Yay!
Cool.
And while we're at it, let's actually apply the smoke shader to the channel density. Huh, blue smoke, how about that? But as you can see, this density data has just been created by the act of burning the fuel. And I can alter the emission rate right there in that thing that I completely forgot to hit. I can control the level of temperature emission. How hot is the fuel burning? How much does it expand as it burns? That whole hot fluids reducing in density thing. And of course the burn rate, number of units of fuel per frame consumed.
So you need fuel for smoke because you need to burn something to get smoke?
You can directly pump density into your sim volume and then apply a smoke shader directly to the density. Or you can burn fuel and let the burning fuel emit smoke. So you've got both options there. If you wanted flickering, if you wanted flame that was actually emitting smoke in a natural-looking manner, you'd go via fuel. If you just wanted to, do a fireball and have a big puff of smoke coming out of it, you could cheat and just directly pump density in there. Make sense?
Would this be an effective solution to generate something like fog rolling in mist, or are you back to real flow?
It's funny you mention that,
Seems like it's
because
right in this
back
borderline between the two.
back at the beginning of the year, I was working at the Asylum on a fun little movie called Battle Dogs for the Sci-Fi Channel. And one thing that they wanted to do was flood an airport with sleepy gas, basically. And that's exactly what I used Turbulence for. I built some rough geometry of seats and things, loaded in the scene, which had werewolves staggering around, stuck a density emitter at one end, filled the volume with density, and it was kind of cool because it was curling around the werewolves and around the seats. So yeah, exactly that sort of thing. It's also a good fog machine. There was another shot where these werewolves were running through smoke grenade smoke in an alleyway, and I've got to say, seeing simulated smoke curling around leaping creatures was kind of a feeling of power.
Were the creatures CG animated?
Oh yeah. They were.
So you didn't have to like rotate over to generate their displacement.
Please do not say roto again. It hurts. But no. That was actually the cool thing. Was seeing as these were character animated creatures, these were actual 3D creatures in LightWave. I just hit make collision,
And you were done.
and I was done.
You don't need like a low-res proxy object for it to.
Didn't seem to care. These were bone-rigged sub-patch creatures, and my entire involvement with the process was setting some emission parameters and hitting make collision on the creatures themselves. It's kind of amazing. Actually, I'm going to take this moment to jump ahead to something that I was going to play with as a finale, but I figure that's related to this, because these volumes actually really work. They are actually functioning volume. Damn. No tool should be fine. Yeah. So this took me about 5 minutes to set up last night when I was thinking, oh God, what am I going to show them that doesn't ship with the software? What we've got here is one of LightWave's unit cube parked at the bottom of our volume container. Volume container itself. The cuboid at the bottom is an emitter, and all it's doing is emitting 5 units of density per frame. It intersects with the bottom of the volume. Then what I've got is a screw object that I hastily built, and a tube object with the wizardry of 2 bevel operations and clicking bridge to make a hollow cylinder. I'm just going to hit play. So it's an Archimedes screw. The screw is lifting up density from the emitter at the bottom and throwing it out the top of the tube.
That's why it really low.
Isn't this fun? Now, the simple...
Filtrations or something.
Hmm?
Or filtrations or something.
And that just worked. That took me about 5 minutes to set up. And I ran the sim thinking, this isn't going to work. And it worked like a charm. Which, I really would have more faith in my tool set, because... Okay, this is actually a nice chance to take a look at some of the more fiddly bits and pieces in the simulation panel. With the solver tab, we've got these 2 arguments of frame substeps limit and pressure iteration limit. Frame substeps is just how many samples of the simulation occur between frames. So I can increase that to 5 sub-steps between frame 1 and frame 2, between frame 2 and frame 3, and you get it. And that'll increase the accuracy, the physical accuracy of the simulation. It'll also take 5 times as long to calculate. But there are times when this is incredibly important. For example, if you have an emitter that's either moving faster or emitting faster than the voxel size per frame, you can get gaps in your sim. If you start getting gappy sims, and dear God, that sounds bad. There's an ointment. No, there's a text box here. The frame substeps limit will let you do higher detailed temporal sampling to correct that kind of error. Pardon me. Again, the pressure iteration limit. What TFD is functionally doing is simulating the equalization of pressures in the sim volume. When you introduce it's that whole water finding its own level thing, or if you undo the effort it takes to blow up a balloon, the balloon will collapse because the pressurized air is trying to equalize its pressure with the air outside. The pressure iteration limit is how accurately that pressure equalization is calculated. So, just good to know that they are there while you're playing with it, in case things start getting weird. Try ramping those up. Adaptive container, pretty straightforward. You see this green cuboid inside the white cuboid? All that's happening there is the greeny yellowy bit is the active data in the container. So rather than calculating what's happening in every single voxel, it's just calculating what's happened in voxels it already knows are active, saving both processor time and storage space. Velocity advection and channel advection accuracies, I can come back to.
How does it impact the calculation time if you start having multiple emitters that are interacting with each other? Like if you've got a fire burning here and all of a sudden the bomb goes off a few feet away from it, does that start getting...
It starts to mount up. Generally speaking, the more that's happening within the simulation volume, the slower things are going to get. There's always something you can do to speed things up, whether it's dropping the voxel size or reducing some of the simulation accuracy.
Is that something you've dealt with a lot of interactive simulations, or are they more one-off?
Really, not so much. Not for work anyway. Just for my own amusement. Yeah, I'll sit there and keep things nice and low detail so I can set light to things really quickly. But generally, if I'm working, sensibly and for production, I'll keep the voxel size quite large until I've got things locked in, then start turning things up, so that I've got my smoke and flame blocked out, and then start doing things that'll slow things down. It's probably worth throwing in there that you are not restricted to one fluid container per scene. You can have multiple fluid containers if you've got something that's burning at both ends, but there's a huge gap in the middle, or if you've got like 8 windows on a building on fire.
Can the elements within interact if they cross over each other? Yeah.
They can do, yes. Very important point though, use a different cache directory for each fluid container. Otherwise they'll all end up containing the same thing. Okay, my really groovy Archimedes screw seems to have broken for right now, so I'm going to move on from it. But feel free to grab a copy of the demos of that scene if you want it. It's fine. Right, any questions from anyone so far?
Can you have two different colored smokes? Yeah, say you have flare over here and flare over here. You want red smoke off this one and green smoke off that one. Can you do that?
Not in camera. That's a compositing job.
Or if you want to have them mixed together.
Yeah, at this point, to the best of my knowledge, it is one smoke shader and one fire shader per instance of turbulence. Yeah, you can have multiple volumes, but they will be shaded using the same shaders. For now. Who knows what the future may bring.
Mark,
Hello.
you said that vorticity and turbulence were low-res ways of affecting the simulation.
Not so much low res, but
At the voxel
they work at the voxel level, yes. There's also a further method for perturbing the smoke and flame, subgrid detail, which is not quite a post effect, but it's added at the detail level below the voxel. We'll be looking at that shortly.
I'm starting to think there must have been some volt switch to turn off like the visibility. Never mind.
No, he doesn't have the texture shade, but
Any others? Yeah, my question is, how much, what was the biggest cache you ever created? Do you remember how much hard drive space that took?
About 38. Yeah, drop to zero. About 380 gig. So, rule 1, VPL lies. It lies to you, it lies. It gets kind of close, but lies! So, let's just go to our camera. That is a very silly resolution, and I'm not having it. Camera view, texture change, solid, camera, translate. Yeah, if you want to drive your rendering time stratospheric, then just shove your camera deep into a really complex volume. That said, it's better than shoving your camera into a thick patch of hypervoxels.
have you ever flown through exploding?
Yeah. It was great. Okie dokie, let's see what's happening here. Sneaky. Never for work, is my answer to that one.
Turn off your graph mode, does it get closer after that?
There we go. See, it's almost like using Sasquatch again, because you've got these third-party progress panels popping up. Party progress panels.
motion blur better than hypervoxels.
Oh my word, yes. If you switch on TFD in motion blur mode, and I'll get to where you do that, then it will use your camera's motion blur settings. So whether you're on classic or dithered or photoreal, it will use exactly those settings. The plus side is, it uses exactly those settings. The downside is, it uses exactly those settings. So if you've got 8 passes of photoreal motion blur, don't wait for it to finish.
Have you used something like RSMB on it?
RSMB I have used with great effect on this. There are a couple of currently intrinsic drawbacks. One is depth buffer. Not really. The depth buffer output is the bounding box of the volume container. Also, motion vectors as compositing buffers don't really work. So if you were hoping to fire up Nuke or Fusion and apply motion vector blur using X and Y velocity data, yeah, RSMB. These These are,
A nice hybrid, like a little bit of in-house in-camera motion blur coupled with a little bit extra on the other side to kind of balance out the time versus the bottom.
yeah, or, you know, get creative with radial blur. Or vector blur, or, you know, motion blurs.
Does this screamer net?
Yes. Yes, it does. If all the configs associated with it don't have autoscan plugins enabled. It's ticklish, but it can be done.
So they did that fixing
Hmm?
Yeah, they rendered TFD on the ARM fixing window.
Did you have many problems?
Not with TFD, not that I remember. We didn't
God, that was such a weighted answer. Not with TFD. That was polite.
Actually, I've got a couple questions. If you put on VPR right now, in
Let's-
non-draft mode, what does it look like compared to the F9?
Lies.
What do you suppose is going on there?
Well, I'm guessing that the first and utmost thing is it's not doing multiple scattering with the smoke. Whereas you saw that little third-party progress bar that popped up. That was said calculating multiple scattering. It's calculating ray marching through the smoke volume. And absorption and that kind of thing. So that's not on by default. The default shading mode is actually quite fast, but doesn't do really nifty multiple scattering. Now, the really awesome thing about the multiple scattering is, as you can see, it's doing light transport through the volume. So, if you wanted something like Prometheus landing, where you've got a big cloud of dust being kicked up and a light sinking down through it, oh yes, it'll propagate the light through the volume. I know, right?
The other question I had was, is it possible to do fake color renders to make that smoke and fire 100% luminosity diffuse, like a cutout, and then create like a black to white texture to render a depth pass as a second render? It's one of those things that I haven't
You
even.
can find the shader versions.
Do you know, I have not even tried that. I'm not certain.
It would be a fog pass, but without actually using lightweight fog, if it
Yeah,
worked.
you can use the density channel and run that through the gradient for the like the smoke or fire shader. And put it on custom colors.
Oh, okay, so that could be a way for people to get a depth pass as a second render. And if someone was handy with Python, they could edit the text of like spawn the depth pass off of the original LWS files and get, so they wouldn't have to do it by hand.
Do we know anyone doing Python here?
So, Jen, are you busy next week, darling?
Because that's what people want. They're willing to do fog passes, they just don't.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do the fog. Turbulence FD and fog, they don't mix at this time. But if TFD can be textured, who cares, you know, just hold your own.
Don't mind me, I'm just checking my notes.
Because that also opens the door for point position passes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if there's any way, it seems a little counterintuitive to me, because there's a button right down here, cache velocity, which saves the velocity cache for each voxel. So one would think that extracting that data to come up with a set of motion vector buffer passes wouldn't be a huge leap. I don't know.
If with the velocity that it's storing internally, it's probably world coordinates, whereas the ones you care about are screen coordinates relative to the camera.
Truth.
That's the big business with motion vectors.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Right, what am I looking at?
So can you put a checkerboard texture on the smoker fire?
No. let me get a... just get a handle on what's happening here. So it's just fuel that's burning. Fuel burning. And letting off all that. Okay. So let's take a look at the rendering side of things. Now, again, with the rendering side of things, an awful lot of it comes back to these function curves. So I'm going to be spending a little time on these and playing with them and showing you guys the effect that they have. But get used to this window. You're going to be seeing it. Whoop, crap. Oh, go away! I will be more graceful the next time we see it. Right, so the all-important rendering tab. Despite the fact that it's a complete sack of lies, VPR is still useful to a certain extent. That's fun. Let's just turn the smoke shader off for now. Wow, really?
So there's no T buttons on the rendering tab? Oh, there's one.
There's one for smoke color, but it's not a direct control. The smoke basal color, as in B-A-S-A-L, not B-A-S-I-L, obviously. The basal smoke color is just the starting point from which it's then got all the calculations of fire color, incident lights from the scene, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, you could apply a texture map, but it wouldn't be direct control, it would be more of a guide than a direct override. Make sense?
Yeah, kind of like how you can put a texture on a white surface, where 100% diffuse surface within the light color might affect it.
Yeah, probably.
That's why I was wondering if it was possible to eliminate light's interference and then just do a direct color on the sky.
Well, you know, I've never tried applying a checkerboard texture.
Do it!
I'm doing it. I'm doing it. You don't have to tell me twice. Checkerboard. Let's take a look at the
Your machine's faster at home, isn't it?
Not a huge amount in it. I spent $1,100 on a gaming computer about a year ago.
Same here.
So, probably not much in it, I'd say. The only difference is my graphics card's 2 gig as opposed to 1. But then again, I knew I'd want more texture RAM. So, really not seeing much checkerboard here.
What if you made it green?
Huh?
What if you made checkerboard green?
Let's try it.
Jan, you're dead to me.
I'm not the one who installed this version of LightWave. It's your fault, Ken.
Now, let's not fight in front of the children. Thank you, we're here all week. Oh boy. So trying this with a bright green checkerboard, used in the old and busted 11.5 color picker, rather than the Mount of Majesty and Sagacity that is the port of Jovian for, hey, look at that, it's gone green.
Big checkerboard.
Well, the grid in the world is 0.5 meter at this point, and I set that grid size to 0.5 meter. So whilst it's indisputably, you know, green, I'm not seeing much actual texture action. So I shall explore that at some point and post my findings.
Cool. 'Cause now I can't live without seeing a checkerboard exploding.
No, man, I'm holding out for polka dots. Seriously. That's going to be the grooviest explosion of all time. Don't tempt me. Alrighty, so in the rendering tab, general controls, frame offset and frame step, pretty straightforward. When do you want your rendering to start and from what frame step size? Most of these guys, generally speaking, you're going to be fine leaving them at the defaults. I speak good. So let's move on to the smoke shader tab, because that's where it starts getting interesting. The first part of the smoke shader tab deals with mapping, and we're right back to our F-curves, our function curves, or transform function curve if you're really feeling picky. So, channel is fairly straightforward, is what channel of the simulation are we using as smoke. In this case, we're taking a temperature channel. So if I go into our smoke mapping and start pulling the minimum value up, you see how it erodes the smoke. Because I'm moving the minimum renderable smoke value higher up, temperature values below a certain threshold are disregarded and not rendered. Again, our high point for this is currently set to about 0.4. Let's try scooging that up to about 0.9. Doink. Suddenly, there's smoke over more of the fire. Again, bring that back down, say 0.3. Bonk. The smoke is only inhabiting that slice of temperature range. It's pretty straightforward, really. Anybody not got it? Got what I'm saying? You see how this is mapping the temperature values between a range of about 0.05 and 0.3 as set by the fuel burn in this scene, and applying the smoke shader across that range. Good so far? I'll take silence as an affirmative. Smoke smoothing is pretty straightforward. It's how much are the smoke voxels getting blurred together.
Do you ever use it?
Sometimes, if I'm getting flicker or just grainy detail, or if I just want more diaphanous nebulous smoke rather than pyroclastic clouds. It's 5 p.m. Color and opacity, thickness values operate in a very familiar way to anyone who's used hypervoxels for smoke or flame. Brightness value, which you can kind of think of as the diffuse value of the smoke. You wouldn't be a million miles off how that's going to react. Subgrid detail. Subgrid good. This is that third detail addition system that I was speaking to you about. Now, this is so massively important, I'm going to pay some attention to it. One thing though, first caveat, is that subgrid detail works off the velocity cache. So if you have not cached velocity when you run your sim, you will not be able to accurately use velocity displacement subgrid detail. Okay? So I'm going to rerun this sim. Of course, the problem is compounded because by caching velocity, whoa, okay. By caching velocity, it increases the RAM loading by about a factor of 3. It also increases the amount of disk space used by about a factor of 3 compared to temperature alone. So it's expensive, but as I think we'll all see in relatively short order, it's kind of worth it.
Is that be used for that big expensive thing on Iron Sky?
Yeah, yeah. Because
It might have taken a third of the space if it wasn't turned on.
see these cache buttons right here? That's every bit as disk space ET as when you're saving a layered EXR file and you're saving out your spec channel, you're saving out the depth, motion vectors. Suddenly you've got one image file that weighs 12 gig. It's really easy to do that if you're saving out a layered EXR file from your comp buffers. Same with this. If you just cache everything, you're going to fill hard disks. So again, it's a sort of experiential thing, I guess, to start realizing what you need to cache for what effect. And you're not always going to need the subgrid detail. It's great to have it available, but you don't always need it. But I haven't shown you what subgrid detail does yet, so let's see what it does. That's probably enough. I'm bored now. Come on, chop chop. Quick sharp. For a moment there, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake.
Well, I thought it was going to be cheaper to just let it finish the frame 60.
Yeah, shh. Okay, so. Let's get the camera in nice and close. And apply a velocity displacement of 1. Okay, did you see that? Keep your eyes down about here. Velocity displacement 0. Like that. Velocity displacement 1. Starting to get these little tendrils in the smoke. I'm increasing the smoke noise intensity. I may have to shuttle backwards and forwards a frame for that to start having an effect.
Does it help to do a limited region render, or is it got to calculate the whole thing anyway to show you that?
That's a good question. And the moment I have an answer for you, I will let you know. Okay, you notice how now we're getting all this microturbulence applied. In fact, too much microturbulence, it's shredding the smoke. So I'm going to turn that noise intensity down to about 100 millimeters. But this is what it's doing, is procedurally applying a second layer of displacement to the smoke. At, as I said, a detail level below the voxel. And Bradley's absolutely correct. It was you, Bradley, wasn't it? Let's try that.
I don't know. I can't remember.
It's definitely one of those Sundays. Let's try limited region. See if that makes it a little less sluggish. Surely ought to. Yep. Good call, that man.
Just some things, it's got to calculate the whole bloody thing.
Yep. Not in this case.
I guess we're just rendering them. We're not really calculating the simulation.
Not any further, no.
Is doing the subgrid. Is it recalculating, or is
No,
it
it's a render layer effect. It's a render level effect rather than being a simulation level effect. And again, this is the difference between vorticity and turbulence, if I was changing the vorticity or turbulence values, I'd have to resim every time.
Right, here you go.
Whereas here, seeing as this is at the render level, I can sit here and just muck around in VPR and use even less time when somebody reminds me that limited region exists. Thank you. So, I'm playing with my noise intensity value, and as you can see, it's adding some quite cute little curlicues and twiddles to the smoke. This is something, again, the default ranges are generally pretty good, but you have to keep an eye on what you're doing, because there's nothing stopping you from putting in a completely ridiculous value, such as 5 meters on a smoke plume that's about 5 meters wide, which will lead to something that's really, really messy. See how that's just completely torn apart now? Yep, it's surprisingly easy to wander outside the normal settings and create something that looks really wacky, but concentrating on stuff that might actually be of use to people at some point.
Control over playback speed for the cache. Once the cache has been calculated and baked out, can you envelope back the playback speed?
That's a simulation level.
After it's been calculated?
Yeah. Certainly for accurate time mapping. That's in the simulation tab, timing sub-tab. You see we've got timescale 100 here, and also the frame range. That can be enveloped, as you can see from the little E button. So let's say you come up with an explosion that looks absolutely brilliant, but it looks miniature. Then you can set your time scale to say 20% speed, and the explosion will look appropriate for being 5 times bigger. As to time remapping after you've simmed, there's not that much you can really do.
Dave was thinking that when you showed the shredded look, that it would be still suitable for a nebula. So if you've got a slice of, if you froze it at a point in time, the playback at a point in time, then move your camera around it.
Oh, right. Yeah, that should be doable. I haven't actually tried using a single frozen point in time stretched out, but yes, that should be doable. It's just off the top of my head. Don't know that one. Well done. Yeah, I'll look into that and post a follow-up, because I don't actually know the answer off the top of my head. That is a good question, though, and I will definitely look into that, because that sounds like fun.
Useful for clouds.
Okay. So, last little bit in here, smoke noise, small power. As you can see, I've got a largest and smallest size, right? And a noise intensity value. That's the physical level of offset that the noise causes. The small power relates to the power of that curl, the size of that curl, at the smallest size and over the range intervening. With a noise small power of 1, then the smallest curls will be as intense as the largest curls. With a small power of 0.5, then the smallest curls will be offset half as much as the largest curls. Smoke noise speed, pretty straightforward. There's the default noise speed of 1. I would encourage you all to download a copy of the demo, render 20 frames with the default speed, and then play with it. If we had one of those Leviathan workstations that they have in the larger studios, I'd show you right now, but we don't. Illumination. This is important. 4 basic modes: none, so self-illuminated only, fast, smooth, and optimal. The down and dirties of those I won't get into right now. Suffice to say, though, that the multiple scattering is the bit that makes light propagate through smoke in an interesting manner. That can be turned off if you don't really need to have that thick, light scattery type smoke. And believe me, it makes a difference to render time. Let me turn the limited region back. No, let me leave the limited region on, what the heck, and just give you an example. Multiple scattering on. See, that's this bit, multiple scattering. It takes its sweet time. Now, I'm afraid of the abort button, so I'm not going to press it. Shouldn't take that long, really.
Do you have a collection of reel or anything you do today of just like shot after shot after shot of explosions or smoke bombs or anything like that that you've done?
You know,
Sort of for production or whatever?
Not so much. Unfortunately, about 85% of what I've been up to this year is still covered by NDA.
Right, it doesn't come out.
So I can't. I'm afraid I can't show you most of what I've been doing this year.
How complex is what you're doing today relative to what you did on another movie that had glimpses in space?
Okay. Just comparing this to Iron Sky, because it's the referent that we can all look at. I know. Hey, look, it's been at least half an hour.
Okay.
I'm allowed one Iron. Oops.
Well, doesn't your reel have a lot of
Yeah.
activity on it?
Yeah, it's got a reasonable amount. There's some stuff from that movie, and in honesty, those Zeppelin destructs were not particularly much more complicated than anything we've looked at. Most of the time, if you want to make a zero-G explosion, then just a sphere with a displacement map and a particle emitter inside it spraying bits of shrapnel will get you 90% of the way there. Because seriously, the tool itself does most of the heavy lifting. You just tell it what you want it to do and let it rip.
Like an Archimedes group.
Great example. Great example. Somebody should make one of those. Yeah, I don't know, but I suspect the fact that I built that scene in 11.6 and I'm now trying to muck with it in 11.5, I think that's messing up something, which is why the subsequent sim didn't work.
Well, it was working, it just wasn't showing it.
Yeah, that sort of counts as not working. when you end up with an empty sim volume.
Well, the thing is, we never hit F9 or VPR to confirm that it was empty, so.
True, and we can go back and look if you really like. Okay, come on.
It doesn't seem like the limited region affected that a whole lot.
If anything, it seems slower than last time I hit F9. Does it? Yeah. That said, last time I hit F9, I didn't have the cache velocity and the subgrid detail, which is probably making the calc more complicated. But anyway, let's do a before and after, an A/B. That's with the multiple scattering switched on. I'm going to turn multiple scattering off and hit F9 again. Should go faster, probably won't be as pretty. One thing that's absolutely crazy to me, but also like crazy awesome, is that incandescence in turbulence can affect your radiosity solution. Yeah, light casting from flame. Don't expect it to be fast, though, because let's face it, you're asking quite a lot of it. Okay, so no multiple scattering of light through smoke. Should turn VPR off. And then with the multiple scatter, you can really see the difference. It really is. Fire is so very pretty. Anywho, right. Is there anything that I haven't covered to anybody's satisfaction?
Just
Because-
curious, do they have anything for like campfire sparks and stuff included?
Okay, well, let's just scamper through the demo scenes. I can't remember there being a campfire. There's a waving torch. Let's take a look at the waving torch.
That one didn't have sparks.
No, but as far as I can tell, and I'm saying that because there's a new version that I haven't looked at today, but at no point have I seen a TFD simulation natively emit sparks. It's not, seeing as it works with gases and specifically and only gases, there's no particulate matter like carbonized wood flakes to come off as sparks. So I would add a particle emitter to create sparks, even if it's just rendering sprite mode hypervoxels as little yellow streaks. But let's take a look at a wavy fire, because that's, it's a burning stick, and what is a campfire but a bunch of burning sticks who are friends? Bring it up. Emitters. Ball emitting temperature and density. Where's the ball? There's the ball. Right. Let me just set that to at least wireframe visibility. Vertices. Vertices is fun. Set our cache folder. Current projects. Whoops. Turbulence FD demo. And let's just overwrite good old folder number 1. Start simulation. Okay, we don't have long left this afternoon, folks, so if there's anything you particularly want me to cover, do think of it in question form in the next few minutes.
When you were talking about the fog or the sleeping gas rolling in, the werewolves and everything. Earlier you said 0 to 10 meters. Did you do that simulation at small size and scale it up, or did it actually work at a larger size?
It did work at a larger size, but I did make a rod for my own back by not taking the time to scale the scene down, because the simulator itself will work absolutely fine at higher numerical values. You just have to change more of those default numerical values for it to work. Make sense?
Yeah.
So
What show was it? Battle Dogs? What was it called?
Battle Dogs.
Is that out yet?
Yeah, that was on Sci-Fi April, I think.
I mean, if one wanted to see a sample.
Yeah. I also fuel airbombed Midtown Manhattan as well. I also FAE'd Midtown Manhattan as well. So, yeah. Well, this is the best thing about being a VFX artist, is that we can blow up the same thing as many times as we like.
What was the most RAM you ever used for Turbulence 4 VFX sim?
The most RAM I've ever used is 32 gig. I do know of a chap who had I think it was 128 gig of memory in his workstation. That was for Fume.
Did he hit that limit?
Yeah, actually.
What was he doing?
Cloud deck. A full cloud deck to the horizon. So that was brute force computation right there.
Oh, I know a question for you. Is there anything in Fume effects that you wish were in Turbulence? Is there a tool that you're like, this would be so nice? Or some feature for it? Is there anything that would drive you to use Fume effects as opposed to Turbulence FD?
Yeah, if somebody hired me to.
Yeah.
Left to your own devices.
Left to my own devices, I can't.
Whatever resources you need. Do you have a preference for one over the other?
The only thing I can really say about it is that Fume has been in development for longer,
Sure.
but any issue I have isn't so much with Fume. If I could get thinking particles in LightWave, my answer would be an unequivocal no. I've got everything I need.
So it's another tool that would make the difference.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
It's and look, we're just doing it in near real time. How much fun is this?
And that ships with, well, even with
This,
the demo.
yeah, this is one of the Turbulence demo scenes.
See, but like, I'd love to see that really nicely rendered. I mean, I can see that the simulation looks great, but I mean, there's a quantum leap between a good-looking simulation and it fooling your eye into thinking, you know, and if you added that into the live action play, that it was real.
Okay, so let's talk mapping functions. Rendering fire shader. That's rendering on density. Texture changes. No,
What do you
VPI.
say, render presets?
Not yet. I use scenes for that. Right. Color and opacity. By default, Flame is handled as a black body system with, as you can see, high and low temperatures, opacity, blah blah. So let's turn that opacity down a bit and start mucking with our temperatures. Okay, so starting to see something a little bit more interesting there. Yes, we've got velocity cached. Booyah! Velocity displacement on. Noise fire intensity 0.2. Let's see what's happening. Okay, a little bit too much noise. So it's kind of funny because on that movie that I talked too much about, there's an F-22 that gets shot down in a big sleet of flame, and Lee Stringer, who I was working with, said, "Hey, wow, that looks like the fiery phoenix," and I was actually using this roiling cloud of fire to flip the bird. So, yeah, Easter eggs, eh? So by mucking with the temperature range that the fire covers and the amount of subgrid displacement that's going on in there, okay, that's starting to look.
And obviously, you know, you can spend a lot of time on your plasma.
Oh yeah, adding, yeah, there's really only so far that you'd want to go in camera. Because things like bloom and flare just make so much more sense to apply as a post effect. Whoop, haha, extra 0 in there. But you see how even with just a little bit of fiddling we're starting to get some quite nice results. Not quite there yet, but it's not horrible. Let's flip that back to that and see what F9 says. So yeah, not perfect, but heading in a tolerable sort of direction.
How does this interact with like reflective or transparent surfaces or anything? Like if that was sitting on a mirror, 3D LightWave mirror.
Let's find out!
It does.
Does?
Oh, I was going to put in some Jommy and show him. I'm doing it. Doing it. No, it's old and I don't like it anymore.
Yeah, there's no such thing as presets for any of this.
Can you save stuff? Yeah, can you save it all? Or do you have to save the scene?
Save the scene at this point. At this point, like I say, still.
As version 1, it's pretty terrific.
Thank you. I like it. You know, there's a reason I actually wanted to come out here and get all giddy about setting light to things. Okay, let's try an F9 with that. I've just set reflectivity on the object beneath.
What is it?
Ta-da! So,
There's a light aspect, so it actually casts light on this stuff too.
I can.
That's really great.
Okay, so shadow of the
Black body.
emitter object, shadows cast by density and reflection in the plane.
Gonna slip Monte Carlo in there?
I say, steady on, girl.
What did you want to do?
Oh, never mind. Dave just said that there's a custom light you can do with it that will get a light cast in there. Never mind, it doesn't have to be Monte Carlo.
Well, let's brute force it just the once, eh?
Yeah, he likes when you say this.
Okie dokie. I don't actually remember where the setting for that is, so let's just see what happens. Okay, again, I guess we're going to need a forum thread for me to put in the answers to questions that I didn't have the answers to.
So Dave, where is this light casting from?
The things like lights. Fire lights.
It has a custom light to them?
Yeah, they go to light panel and add a light.
Well, there is a firelight. Okay, I'm not going to muck with that right now. There's just a couple of other things I really want to touch on first. Point 1, the shader will add a volumetric shader called fluid shader. This is where you can enable motion blur. Okay?
The camera, where it will utilize the cameras.
It'll utilize the camera's motion blur, whether it's classic LightWave. No, we're not that lucky. This is why we can render breakouts, really. So there's that. What else? I'm sure there was something else important that I wanted to touch.
You can make the thing unseen by camera so you can capture only its reflection.
Yep. There's that. It respects most LightWave rendering flags. I guess I'm just going to grab one more of the demo scenes because it's actually really cool. The fuel masking demo scene. I was going to spend quite some time going over fuel masking, but I think we're about out of time. But suffice it to say, it's really, really good fun being able to control ignition parameters. And you can even, in the simulation,
It uses a texture for like on.
Yep. But seeing as the fuel is actually controllable, you can, having set your fuel source, ignition source, etc., you can even set the vapor boundary between that which is ignited and that which has not yet been lit. So if I set that fuel mask smoothing to 50 millimeters and resim, that's the gradient between what's already lit and what hasn't, and what's still just fuel waiting for the flame.
What texture are you using to control this?
I'm using a splotch of geometry.
Oh,
It's just a puddle object that has been designated as fuel, and then another object designated as match. I didn't even come up with that one. This is a demo scene. So, isn't this fun? Okay, any last questions?
what is the, where these, blue puddle is the fuel, and the match is the little pyramid. And if you were to scrub through the scene, I guess the match would be darting all over, or it starts in one spot. It just has to start in one spot and for it to spread throughout the rest.
Yep, because that fuel mask smoothing is bigger than the gap between splashes in the puddle. Burning vapor is calculated to cross over from one splash to another, hence propagating the flame. If I set this fuel mask smoothing at 0, then this should fail to transfer. Let's see if I've got my brain in the right place. Yep.
If only fire was that safe in the real world.
That's your wish, hun, not mine. I'm sorry, that's probably an incredibly bad taste, but what can I say? Animator.
Is it possible to have a flame like that follow a controlled path? Or is this all just physics?
It's pretty much physics. You can build the path, just like laying a trail of gasoline on the ground. Not that any of us have ever done such a reprehensible thing. But you could simulate the effect of that.
Nor would you want to use acids on the racing day. It's all in that.
And certainly never gunpowder.
No. Wouldn't do it.
No. But as you can see, the direction and speed of flame propagation is quite controllable. Indeed, let's just see what happens if I set my burn rate.
So, like, very simply, if you just wanted to have somebody spelled out something in the flame, you would just make a piece of potentially geometry or whatever.
Yeah, and just call that fuel. Just make it an emitter, have it as set fuel 1, or however much fuel you want, bearing in mind that the burn rate will consume that fuel. But yeah, you can have your name in fire, or anything in fire that you can sketch in geometry. So pretty much anything. It's cool. Yeah, it's cool. It's hot stuff. This. Okay. Any more questions?
Can you use anything to turn off fire? Like, for example, like a water hose or something? There's something that you can use in there?
All the combustion parameters can be enveloped.
Can
So
you have negative fuel?
That's something I've never tried. That's an interesting one.
That could turn it off.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's take a look and see.
That would create
That's what I was hoping for. Like, if you don't have enough fuel, it'll go away. Is that what the fire and then something clicking out? Kind of like negative lines. Yeah.
Hey, how about that? Okay, so let's try this. Nobody gasp in amazement yet. I haven't run the sim. But it didn't throw a wobbly when I said to the sphere, set fuel -5. So let's see what happens. I brought the sphere moving through the fire between frames 130 and 150, I think. I have to say this is the first time I've willingly put one of these flames out. So it's a special day for me. Normally I do the other thing. After that, I get the feeling that we really need to stop, but let's see. Killjoy sphere in motion.
What meters?
does not appear to be having a significant effect.
That probably makes you very happy.
Yeah.
You know, if few effects comes with the water hose or sand bucket.
I don't know about that one. I do know that Turbulence FD comes with a flame hose, which is much more interesting if you ask me. Because really, let's face it, what is life without a flamethrower? Whee! So again, that's just a particle emitter. Also, it's probably worth noting that the different elements of an emitter can be made to respect parent motion to a controllable degree. I believe at this scene, it's 20% motion inherited. Oh, look at that! Whee! Okay. Spare my blushes.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.
Yes, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
My pleasure.